Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. It was the philosopher Walter Pater who observed that all art constantly aspires to the condition of music. Now, perhaps that's because music affects us most personally, painting its own pictures and writing its own stories through the creative force of our individual imaginations. Music is a universal phenomenon and an historic presence in all the world's cultures, just as it is an essential presence in our daily lives. And so it's fitting that our conversation today is about music. And it's fortunate that we have as our guest Leonard Slatkin, conductor of the National Symphony Orchestra. Leonard Slatkin, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you very much.
Let me start by congratulating you on the 4 Grammys that you most recently acquired. It's a nice compliment to the 5 you had previously. I would imagine, having never won one, that each one is very distinctive, but is there something special about this set of 4?
Yes, I'd like to think that, as you said, anytime you are recognized by your colleagues and peers in the industry, that it means something. But this particular one was for a very special project. The work that was recorded is by the American composer William Balcom, who was on the faculty of the University of Michigan. Beginning in the 1960s, and for about 20 years, he set each of William Blake's songs of innocence and experience to music, orchestrated it, and eventually came up with this 2-hour, 20-minute or so piece of music for enormous forces, 10 soloists, full orchestra, chorus, children's chorus, madrigal group, rock group, and you name it, it's in this piece. So because of its sheer size, it became very difficult to mount performances, much less a recording. In fact, in today's market, to record it professionally in the United States would have cost over $1.5 million.
Over $1.5 million.
Yeah.
How did you do it then?
What we did was to go back to the source, and that was the University of Michigan itself. These days, there are so many talented young performers, musicians, instrumentalists, and we decided, let's use the resources of the school to start with. So we saved our money there. We saved it because the choruses were all the local choruses from the Ann Arbor area. Most of us as performers either donated or gave up the majority of what our fee would be. And the total cost, when it was all wrapped up, was $90,000.
As opposed to $1.5 million?
Over $1.5 million. And it's a work that musicians know about in this country. It's a legendary piece just because of its size.
Right.
I have performed it a couple times and taken it on the road, and it's been an amazing success because the work operates by moving stylistically from jazz to pop to reggae to 12-tone to this to that. I mean, you go through every style you can possibly imagine over this journey. And it's all held together by the words of William Blake. So what makes it special is there is, 1, no piece like this, 2, that the record company really believed in the project and committed to it, and that the fact now that the industry acknowledged it as well is really gratifying.
Well, I've heard it, and I think it's magnificent myself, so congratulations from me as well. But there are a couple of other aspects to it that I find also remarkable. First of all, it's a further indication of your very long-standing interest in American composers. I mean, you've done this in St. Louis and here as well. The fact you chose William Balcom. And say a bit about this production, the fact that it came out on a, was it Naxos?
Naxos.
And does that speak to another desire you have to sort of make this music as available as possible to as many as possible, increase the audience for it?
A lot of what you're asking really has more to do with what's going on in the recording marketplace these days. For a period when I was in St. Louis in the 70s and the 80s primarily, I was fortunate enough to be in the midst of this incredible recording scheme. We were doing 5 and 6 discs a year in St. Louis. I was recording 3 or 4 in Europe as well. It was just record after record just kept coming out. And finally, executives at not just my company, which was RCA, then became BMG, they said, you know, wait a minute. We're in a profit-making corporation. We're losing all this money on these discs. Yes, the product is great, but we can't afford to lose anymore. And so many artists got dropped, including myself. And then we had to search for other ways to get our message out. For me, it was never about recording yet another Brahms symphony cycle, a set of Beethoven's, Mahler's, whatever it happens to be. I became more focused on finding projects that were individual and unique, things that hadn't been done before that people felt would be worthwhile to have out there. And this one with Noxus. This is the first one I've done with them. They got interested in it because it was something that falls in their philosophy, something they thought they could market well, that it wouldn't cost them so much, and it wound up, before the Grammys, selling 50,000 copies.
50,000.
Absolutely amazing.
And did you once say that the average classical recording, if it succeeds, is something at 2,000, 3,000?
2,500, 3,000 these days.
And you had 50,000 before the Grammy, before the Grammys.
At a budget price. So that's the good news. And since then, from its release, I've done a couple more discs for them. I'm starting a project of recording all the music of Leroy Anderson, this wonderful composer from the 40s and 50s, with these short little pieces. But to record everything he wrote, I can't wait to do this. Yeah. And we'll be doing a work of John Corigliano based on works of Dylan Thomas. Again, things that are interesting, that are different in the catalog.
You know, Leonard Slatkin, everything you say and the enthusiasm with which you say it speaks of a real vocation to music, and that in turn suggests a lifelong fascination with it. And I want to get, if you don't mind, into the early stages of that life and what led to this. Before I do that, though, because ours is an international program, let me ask you about another facet of your thinking on music. It's very common, it's a commonplace for people to call music the international language. I'm sure you've heard that a million times. Now, I've heard you speak on this. I've heard you say that that's not quite the way you see it. You see it as a sort of a series, if you will, of national languages.
Yes.
Would you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
Well, if you either go to a motion picture or a play or go to a country where you don't speak the language, you're lost unless you have some sort of translation of some kind.
Right.
And yet, if you hear a piece of music by, say, Béla Bartók or Zoltán Kodály, which is ostensibly Hungarian, there's something in the music that speaks to you of the country of origin. Or imagine if you came from Azerbaijan or Beijing, whatever, and you hear Aaron Copland's Rodeo. You feel the qualities of the United States, even though you don't speak a word of the language.
Right.
So for me, the international qualities are only that you can transcend the boundaries and the borders. The music itself can cross that. But what it does is it crosses it by being nationalistic in many cases. Now, many composers are not that. In Beethoven's case, for instance, you don't really say, aha, he's a German composer. You say, no, he's Beethoven. And only with a few exceptions did he write outright nationalistic music. But other composers did that. They reached into their roots and they spoke of their own country.
Right.
So I see music as a way of informing people about the culture of origin, usually, of a composer, and of the people performing it. Another thing that makes it international, though, is that I can go out and play music by composers from other countries and try to adapt and adjust accordingly, so I can feel myself in the spirit of Italy when I'm doing Puccini or Verdi, or the spirit of England if I'm doing Vaughan Williams or Walton, or in France if I'm doing Debussy or Ravel, because they have this language that speaks about their country. So I do find it much more national rather than international in intent.
That's marvelous, and that also speaks to something we're really going to get into, and that's your interest in music as a facet of what we might call required education, because it does touch on these things. It does reveal these truths. And you mentioned some very prominent conductors, or composers rather, in what you've just said. But I gather this quality continues. For example, I know that the orchestra under your direction recently did a piece by Roberto Sierra, Misa Latina.
Misa Latina.
Now, tell us a bit about that. I mean, the success of it and its ability to do what you just said.
Well, this is the 75th anniversary year of the National Symphony Orchestra, and so to celebrate, among the projects we've done, I've been to commission 4 pieces of music that are very different.
Right.
And one of those commissions was a work for chorus and orchestra, an evening-long work. Usually these days, you don't commission an evening-long piece, but we wanted that. Now, Roberto I've known for a long time. He's from Puerto Rico, but he's lived in the United States quite a while now. He teaches at Cornell. 4 years ago, we commissioned a piece for orchestra of him called Fandangos, which was based on a 17th century harpsichord piece that was Spanish in origin. And I said to him, Roberto, you know, the flavor and the quality you got here, how much writing for chorus have you done? He says, well, not so much. But vocal writing you've done? Oh, yes. I said, how about creating either a mass or a requiem, but really using the word Latin as two-sided. Use the Latin text, but also go back to your Latin American heritage.
Right.
So what he did was he created this evening-long mass, about 70 minutes, and the musical style is relatively conservative, but in the course of it, he will inject Latin American rhythms, salsa rhythms, merengue, whatever it happens to be. And it flowed naturally, because you have this Latin text, and he's using the words as a spearhead for peace and freedom. And he felt there's something in the spirit of his Latino heritage that would convey itself very clearly in the music. And it really was a big success.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping we get a chance to play it again and record it.
I hope so,
it's
too.
Knox's project.
Well, great. And I'm very glad that Knox's project interest is continuing. And I'm struck by what you just said, because it sounds to me that what you asked Roberto to do and what he did was combine, there's a dual influence here, sort of a classical Latin and this introduction to Latin culture as it is today. That's marvelous.
Well, a lot of the reason that I went to Roberto was not thinking about that the audience today would enjoy it, but I'm thinking a little bit ahead. I'm trying to. Crystal ball, I could be wrong. But I don't see our audiences being the same in 20, 25 years. You hear a lot about the declining audiences. They're getting older. They don't know as much. The gray. They've always been gray. Audiences that come to symphonies have always been an older crowd. So that hasn't really changed. There are fewer of them for the most part, but that's because we failed in our education system. And I'm thinking, okay, 20, 25 years from now, the population of the United States will have altered itself quite dramatically. We'll see a greater influx of people from the Latino countries, not just South America or Central America, but Spain as well. And these are countries which are doing a lot for education in the arts for the young people. The same can be said of the Asian cultures, especially China now. China, in a very short time, has caught up with the rest of the world. It didn't take very long. But now you're seeing these creative and recreative artists coming from China as well as Japan and Korea, which we've had for the last 30 years or so. And I think that because so many of these people wind up settling and working in the United States, that they will begin to change the complexion of our audience, which until now has had a heritage primarily Eurocentric and Slavic. But I think it's going to move a little bit more towards a Latino and Asian-based audience quite well in the future.
I think that's admirable foresight. Once again, it speaks, and this is a continuing theme in your life, your work, and even this conversation, the emphasis on education as a way of making this all palpable.
It's critical.
Critical,
it just
indeed.
is.
That, of course, that really stimulates my curiosity. I think the audience's curiosity about your own education, your own background, and it's fabulous. I mean, you're the son of Felix and Eleanor Slatkin, renowned studio musicians and founders of the Hollywood String Quartet.
In addition to which, they had a third life, which was working in the then burgeoning popular music industry in Los Angeles. My dad was the concertmaster at 20th. My mom was the first cellist at Warner's. Her brother was the pianist at Warner's. So that was the daytime life under the studio system. 5 days a week, you worked in the studios. At night, they were one half of, as you said, the Hollywood String Quartet, which for its 11 years or so of existence was very famous and very prominent. So I had the chance to hear film music by the great composers, Korngold, Steiner, Alfred Newman.
In your home.
In the home. But in addition to that, the popular music scene had Sinatra and Nat King Cole and Art Tatum, and all these people would come to our house to play and work on projects. And then Stravinsky would come over, or Schoenberg, or William Walton, or Heitor Villa-Lobos. It was a hotbed of musical activity. I'm thrilled that I still have the piano that all these people came and played on. Sure, I wouldn't give that up for the world, that instrument. And every so often I've had the chance to go back to LA. If you're from there, you can call it LA, by the way. And I visited the house where all this took place. And I've tried to explain to the woman who owns it that this is what happened here. And she's a nice woman, but she doesn't feel the connection to the past the same way. I walk in and I'm totally nostalgic. And I said, oh, look, Danny Kaye sat there. Who?
That's a little sad. I mean, that's as I say, that's a fabulous upbringing.
But the point of it was that despite all that, I grew up in the Los Angeles public school system. There was no private school, nothing like that. It was just like any other kid. And the education system was so different in the late 50s, early 60s. My high school, for instance, could boast 3 choruses, 2 bands, an orchestra, and even a composer in residence. And And all this
Who was
took
William
place.
Schickley?
Peter Schickley.
Peter Schickley, right.
Peter Schickley was there under a Ford Foundation grant. And what makes it really unique was that none of this took place before or after school. It was part of the curriculum. Now, not everybody could play in the band, orchestra, or sing in the chorus. So if you didn't do that, you did shop, you did other things that were electives.
Right.
But they were not separated
No.
in the way we see now, where kids have to go before school or stay after for these activities.
It was an integral part.
It was an integral part of the curriculum.
Of the education.
And I think that needs to come back into play.
Yeah.
Even if most people don't enter the arts as a profession, if you have that foundation when you're very young of the arts as a unleashing of creativity, it only adds to what you bring to your chosen profession.
Well said.
Be it a lawyer, accountant, it doesn't matter.
You know, I think the most remarkable part of all of that, and all of it's remarkable really, but the fact that it was the public schools that offered that. We're not talking about elite private institutions.
Not at all. And this was the norm
Yeah.
in many schools.
You know, I get very curious now about a couple of aspects of all of this. First of all, it sounds idyllic, but was there also, I mean, you have these extraordinary, in your own home, in your own house, your own family, this collection of very enormous talent. I mean, is that always a very comfortable thing
No,
to show?
of course not. It's very difficult. Just like anybody whose fathers or mothers in sports and have made a strong reputation, it becomes very difficult after a while. You don't realize it when you're so young, but later on it becomes a big problem. So when I first ventured into the world of conducting, I'd been playing violin and piano and composing, and I realized conducting is what I wanted to do. I had to overcome a lot because my father, in addition to everything else, was also a good conductor.
So it's a very competitive thing, isn't it?
Unbelievably competitive. And I don't think I would actually be doing what I do now if my father had lived longer. He died when I was 19.
He was 47, wasn't he?
He was only 47 years old, yeah. And we weren't a particularly close family, but still that competitive part of it was very difficult.
Right.
And those first years, even 10 years or so after he died, if I was accepted to be a student or then some jobs, it was always, oh, you're the son of. And why can't I feel like I've earned this on my own merit? Well, enough years passed and enough therapy sessions to get it all out on the table. And it became interesting because all of a sudden my mother, who died 10 years ago, was getting, oh, you're the mother of. So it was a kind of reversal.
Right.
And then my parents' quartet albums got reissued about 5 or 6 years ago. And all of a sudden, I was the son of again, but this time I liked it.
Yeah, you know, I really appreciate your candor on that. I mean, I think everyone viewing appreciates it too. We're so used to people who achieve great eminence, and then they never reveal these perhaps more tense parts of their lives.
Yes, but if you don't do that and share it with other people, at some point you realize you're going to be stuck with so much bottled up inside you. You have to get it out. And it is not diminishing the talent of my parents at all.
Right, nor your respect or love for them either.
And even that, but it was more the struggle to break through and become your own self.
Right.
My brother, for instance, who's a cellist, because you could not be in our family without being a musician, clearly, he went so far as to change the spelling of our last name.
That's right, I've noted.
He spells it Zlotkin. He thinks that's closer to the original, but we don't know that for sure. I think part of that was because he needed to have an even greater separation of identity because he's a cellist, his mother was a cellist, her father was a cellist, and her father was a cellist. There were 4 generations of cellists to fight through there, and they were all really good.
My goodness, I really appreciate that, Leonard Slatkin.
No problem.
All along, I think we've tantalized our audience with this very profound notion that you have of the importance of music education in the schools. You've given us your own personal example, and it's obvious to everyone watching right now how important that is to you. So I guess the $64 million question is, speak to us about why it's important for our public schools now, in the year 2006 and beyond, to have that again in our society, and perhaps even more intriguingly, how you think we might go about it. How would we bring it back into the schools if we did?
I think it's very difficult, but I sort of have a possible solution. We have to assume that a lot of what's happened is based on budgets, that school systems are strapped for cash, like most institutions, and what they have, they're going to put more into certain academics, sports, whatever. And I'm not against any of that, of course, it's fine. But in order to get the arts back in, we have to find a way, almost a backdoor to start. And I think that backdoor is history.
History.
Because all of the arts relate to history in some way, whether it's painting, sculpture, architecture, music, dance, photography. All of it reflects the culture of a given time. And the best example to understand how I think it could be brought back in is to use Beethoven here. Supposing you're studying in history something about the history of Europe in the 19th century, and you come to the Napoleonic era, and you want to understand not just what Napoleon did, but what was his influence on others, both positive and negative. Beethoven writes his Third Symphony. He's a true admirer of Napoleon, and he's writing this piece which will be called the Eroica, the heroic, about this larger-than-life person who, on one day, says, "I am now the Emperor of Europe." Beethoven flies into a rage, and he takes the eraser, or whatever he had, and he does this, taking out the dedication to Napoleon. And you can see in the manuscript this hole, clearly done out of anger and rage and frustration. And then you listen to those first couple bars. Bah! Bah! Strong, striking chords, bold. And you can see how the connection of a piece of music to a historical event takes place. It makes you wonder, well, what else happened in Beethoven's life that reflects something of the history of the time? Or say Aaron Copland. Copland writes a ballet about Billy the Kid, legendary figure in American history, and factual, but larger than life. What would cause a composer to write a ballet about a cowboy? In fact, he wrote two. Rodeo's the other one. And we can look back at the history and we can begin to equate almost every piece with something that happened during the time. Even in our own time, the composer John Corigliano, in his First Symphony, was inspired by the Names Project, the AIDS quilt. And he wrote a symphony that tries to depict the ravages, the horrors of the disease. And through this we can begin to understand about, say, worldwide plagues. It's not just about AIDS, it's about other things that happen. It's about wars, it's about all the struggles we have to go through. And you can do this with every art. And I think if we can find a way to fold, at least at the beginning, some of this into the way we teach history and put the arts in that, I think it makes kind of natural sense. Yes, it's going to be harder on the teachers, but maybe we can boost their salaries too.
I find this idea so evocative. Because when you did the Beethoven, made the Beethoven point, I could see that, and I could see how powerful a lesson that can be, as well, enriched by the music of Beethoven for a child to understand history that viscerally. And it made me think this, Leonard Slatkin, when you made mention of your own public education, the composer in residence, that was made possible by a foundation grant.
Ford Foundation.
Why couldn't there be a pilot project in what you're talking about right now? Why not? In a city like this.
And not just this city, but any city. Why can't we find those people who are really committed to education and say, can we ask you to consider such and such idea? I'll give you another one that I'm about to, I haven't proposed this yet, so you're the first to hear about this. And I don't know if it'll get off the ground at all, but you never know. Maybe somebody out there would be interested in this. I've been doing some work recently in various schools, mostly middle school areas in Maryland, Virginia, and here in the district. And I've started to ask the music teachers, what music do your young people play? They mostly are arrangements, and it's good because it's a good introduction to music for young people. But I began to wonder, what would happen if I went to today's leading composers in this country? People who are like the Coriglianos, or the Joan Towers, or the Joe Schwantners, or the John Adams. I mean, you can name 50 composers. And I said, I'd like you to write a piece for, say, 5th through 8th graders for schools. An original piece, not a transcription of something, but a piece by major composers for kids to play. And create a body of works that are a little more contemporary in feel. Now, I can't see very much any of the composers I would know that I could talk to who would, one, turn it down. And two, I could see this as a tremendous tool as an introduction to contemporary music and thought, but done at a level that young players can understand. The kids are great about this because they don't have the built-in prejudices about new music that older audiences sometimes do. Right. And so they can be exposed to something. I was in Lyon 2 years ago, And they took a 4th grade class that I was taken to, pulled them for 1 week, and all they did was focus on music. This was not a music class, it was just kids, whatever. And over the course of the week, they worked with a composer and they created a piece based on sounds. They had little pieces of wood and metal, and they would do that kind of stuff or hit their heads. And it was a really written out piece that they put together. And I was so impressed with it because, again, no prejudice on the parts of the kids. They just love the creative aspect, and it's so important.
Leonard Slatkin, I just want to say, I personally, profoundly hope that you do just what, I know you will. I know you will. I know
I'll
you
keep
will.
at it.
Well, you're bound to. I was going to ask you about your philosophy of music. It comes through you. One can see this dedication. I applaud your career, your success, and your ideas.
Thank you.
This proposal, the one you have on before us and the one you've just announced, congratulations on all of those things.
Let's hope for the best.
We all do. Thank you very much, Leonard Slatkin. And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@woodrowwilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue is also on the MHZ Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. And please join us again right here next week. And thank you so much for watching. And Leonard Slatkin, thank you. That was fun for me.
Next week on Dialogue.
But at the same time, we have a much larger black middle class. And a black middle class that no longer lives with the African American poor. And that's been a real profound change in that when we had de jure segregation, when it was legal, African Americans had to live together, whether we wanted to or not. But now with black people flying to the suburbs, and also some coming back, but nevertheless, the gulf between the African American poor and the middle class has grown, and I think that is making for the biggest difference.